it became more palpable, the effect that it was having on people's, individuals and couples' mental health. So yeah, it was, whether it was a mom talking about their kids being glued to their phone, or their partner being glued to the phone, or in the case of a couple, them both admitting, it was an issue for them, that it had interfered with their intimacy. First thing in the morning, who do they reach for? Their phone rather than each other. So it was kind of coming from all angles, and lots of, another facet was, not being able to switch off from work. So it had lots of different kind of touch points in terms of mental health and relationships, but work, and not being able to draw a line, not being able to draw a boundary with work, because of course you can access your work from anywhere at any time now. You don't need to be confined to the office or even a laptop or a clunky computer. You can be working from your bed as soon as you wake up, or right until you fall asleep. And unfortunately, a lot of people choose to do that because they can do it.
In today's conversation, I'm talking to Hilda Burke. Hilda is a psychotherapist and a counsellor based in London. And we're going to talk about an immensely interesting and valuable subject, I think, in today's society now more than ever: smartphone addiction. Hilda published a book called the Addiction Workbook, and in it she gives advice and guidance on how to cope if you feel you're becoming dependent and spending too much time on your smartphone. She also talks about things you should look out for and things you can do to reduce that dependency. So like, comment, subscribe as well if you can. It really helps the algorithms, and enjoy the conversation. I thought it was immensely valuable, fascinating, and really, really important to hear what Hilda had to say. Thank you. Hilda, thank you so much for joining me. The first question I wanted to ask you, and I think that the subject matter is one that's going to be immensely interesting to a lot of people. Smartphones are obviously ubiquitous in society. In your work as a psychotherapist, when did it become apparent that there was an issue?
I'd say about 6 or 7 years ago, it started to creep in really into the sessions, and it became more palpable, the effect that it was having on people's, individuals and couples' mental health. So yeah, it was, whether it was a mom talking about their kids being glued to their phone, or their partner being glued to the phone, or in the case of a couple, them both admitting, it was an issue for them, that it had interfered with their intimacy. First thing in the morning, who do they reach for? Their phone rather than each other. So it was kind of coming from all angles, and lots of, another facet was, not being able to switch off from work. So it had lots of different kind of touch points in terms of mental health and relationships, but work, and not being able to draw a line, not being able to draw a boundary with work, because of course you can access your work from anywhere at any time now. You don't need to be confined to the office or even a laptop or a clunky computer. You can be working from your bed as soon as you wake up, or right until you fall asleep. And unfortunately, a lot of people choose to do that because they can do it. So yeah, it was kind of coming up in a lot of different guises, problematic guises for people. I mean, obviously phones, I'm not anti-phone per se. I do own a smartphone, and some advocates of, who speak about phone addiction and whatnot don't, but I'm very transparent about the fact that I do. And there is some great, certainly some positive, some amazing things that mobile communication has enabled. But I think certainly how it was showing up in the therapy room was the negative aspects of being sort of always on, no matter where you are.
And in terms of usage versus dependency, what are the indicators, and when do we start to move from having a phone as a utility to becoming dependent?
Yeah, I think, there's the Center for Internet Addiction, it's called? Center for Internet Addiction. They have, and I'm happy to share that the link, a sort of a questionnaire that will kind of show how dependent you are, and there's a number of criteria for that. But I think, you know, kind of a simple rule of thumb is, you know, how do you feel when you go to work or you've gone out without your phone for the day? How bereft do you feel? How lost do you feel? How distraught do you feel? You know, for some of us, it'll be like, oh, that's annoying, you know. But for others of us, it will be like an alcoholic without a drink, you know, twitching. That's going to be a problem. How am I going to get my fix? You know, can I go home at lunchtime? Can I? So, you know, I think it's the kind of the emotional attachment to the phone and the impact of not having access to it, I think, is a really good kind of litmus test as to how attached we are and how dependent we are. But, you know, there's, you know, how long can we go without our phone? How much do we use it? All those things are indicators as well. But I think it's really the emotional connection to it and that feeling of how lost we are without it, that gives a good insight into, you know, our level of dependency.
In terms of what's happening in the brain, now I know you're not a neuroscientist, but you're a psychotherapist and a psychologist. What do you think is happening there in terms of dopamine and serotonin?
Yeah, I've got a very good friend, Anya Kelly, who is a neuroscientist at Trinity, and I've spoken to her about it. And she's, you know, Anya's very scientific, as you would expect from a scientist. So she's like, you know, you can't say exactly, but, you know, it's suggested, it's, you know, it's likely what's going on. It's a dopamine fix that we're getting from our phones. It's a dopamine rush from, and of course, it's not just the phone. It's not just the smartphone. It's what's on it. You know, it's the likes, it's the matches, it's the validation that we get, it's the connections, it's, you know, being endorsed for things, all these things that really feed our ego, you know, our identity, and that's what's sticky on the phone. Because, you know, we had mobile phones have been around for like probably since the early 80s. You know, it was privileged kind of Wall Street stockbrokers and people in the city with their big chunky devices. But, you know, they've been around a pretty long time, but no one really spoke about addiction then. And I think it was because there's so much you can get from a text and a call. Of course, depending on what the call is, you could get a huge dopamine rush. It could be someone calling up to tell you how great you are, how wonderful. So, you know, but I think that it's the apps and the smartphones that really are sticky, and they're engineered to be sticky, that keep us coming back for more and seeing how many followers do we have, how many likes do we have, how many matches do we have, how many connections. So all that is really feeding our need to be valued, our need to be sort of recognized in society, in a community. And of course, you know, dopamine's there we have it biologically for a really good reason. It motivates us to mate, to sort of to strive harder, to get out there, to kind of get the biggest animal, to bring home the biggest prize, all those things. You know, if we didn't have that, the human race would probably die out, because we're not getting those rewards for getting an attractive partner, getting getting the biggest, whatever, buffalo out in the field. So, you know, it's there. We need dopamine, but I think with apps and smartphones and in the digital world, the online world, there's a lot of fast food dopamine. So, you know, I could have 50 matches on Tinder today, possibly, or someone could. Maybe I wouldn't, but maybe I would. But, you know, that's not the same as getting a mate, you know, to mate with and to create children with and everything. You know, not everyone on there even wants to meet. So it's these kind of, but it fires up the same neurons as if we had found an attractive partner to mate with and create children with. But it's kind of fast food. It's not necessarily real. It could be real, of course, it could translate, but what we're getting off on is not the real mate. It's this kind of possibility, and it gives us that same rush. The same with likes. You know, I think, you know, again, dopamine, if being in a community, being together with others, forming villages, all those things are necessary, were necessary for our survival in kind of more primitive societies. We'd have to share resources. We might have to defend ourselves against attack. So again, being taken in, being accepted, it was an important part of our existence in the past. But we're getting that sort of, our primitive brain is getting the same sort of, and of course we do, a large part of our brain is primitive, and it's getting that approval from, oh, a new connection, a new match, oh, people like what I'm doing. So we're kind of getting that same reward, but again, it's sort of fast food. It's not necessarily that these people are our friends, that they want to form community, they want to form lasting bonds with us, or that they will be there if there's an emergency or a crisis. So I think that's the risk with, and that's what makes it sticky. Of course, the people who engineered these apps are some of the brightest brains on the planet. So they know, their knowledge of human behavior and psychology is incredibly refined, and they're using that to make us more hooked on what they're selling. Because even if they're not selling anything, it's a great quote I read a couple of years ago of, if something's free, then we are the product. It's our eyeballs are being sold then, so it's our attention, we're the most kind of limited and scarce resource we have. Our time and our attention is what we're giving. We can, it's a free app, it's a free to download, but actually, what we're giving up is way scarcer than money, because money, we can make more money potentially, but we never get that time back. Our lives are quite short. So I think that's the risk, if we're not conscious of how precious our time is, and the force that we're up against in terms of this wanting to kind of cannibalize our attention, and wanting to sort of just make us stay longer and interact more on these apps. So it's quite, I mean, as I said, there are, I don't want to be too alarmist, because there are good things on, there are some great apps, there's some useful stuff, but I think we really need to be discerning when we realize the kind of the amount of investment that we're up against in terms of, retaining some of our attention for what we really find valuable, for what we need it for.
I did work in the technology industry, right? In a sales capacity, not on the engineering side.
Yeah.
But one of the things we would track is bounce rate, right? So when an IP, a person comes on to the platform, we would be looking for the amount of time they spend on the platform and how many pages and where they go. And we would be monitoring how they interact and what their engagement is with the technology. And there are teams and hordes of people thinking about ways to keep people engaged. The longer they're on the platform, the more advertising you can show to them.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's a lot to do with it. So we understand how it's affecting couples and relationships. People talk about checking their phone, and the word check, I wanted to ask you about it. It's an interesting word, right? Are they trying to alleviate anxiety, or is the phone an anxiety-inducing device?
I think both.
Yeah.
I think I'm always curious about, when clients will say, oh, I'd spend too much time on my phone on Sunday or Saturday or Friday night or whenever it was. And I'm like, what was going on for you? How did you feel on Friday night or Saturday or Sunday? And it's like, oh no, I felt really bad, actually. I was meant to go out with a friend and they cancelled, and I felt really lonely and a bit low, or, it had been a shit day at work. And, so it generally, they're not going on. It's like, reaching for a drink to drown your sorrows. They're not going on to it. Of course, you can go onto your phone and be perfectly happy, but these are the periods they spend on their phone where they felt they've spent too long, or they feel guilty about it. It's not just going on to check something and, maybe watch a funny video or something. It's not that. It's when they feel like, I meant to just check something and I spent 4 hours. It's that kind of, I just went out for a drink and then I don't remember how I got home. It's that kind of thing. I did just plan to go for a quick, it's the same sort of thing. So that kind of unconscious, trying to kind of block out a feeling, but actually ultimately feeling way worse than when you started, because they're going on to make themselves feel better. But inevitably, that energy, that low energy will be attracted to, oh, look how everyone else is having an amazing time. Oh God, everyone else is out tonight. And oh my God, is that my ex-boyfriend? Oh, look at his girlfriend now. She's gorgeous or she's ugly or whatever she is, So it's that kind of misery attracts misery. So it kind of tends to spiral downwards quite quickly. So it's a kind of a lack of consciousness rather than, I guess if you can catch yourself and go, okay, why am I going on my phone now? Even asking yourself that because I feel awful. Right. Okay. Even having the consciousness of, okay, what would help me feel better? Because most of my clients are aware. They'll go, I knew I'd feel, well, what did I expect? It's never a surprise, so it's those patterns of being more conscious of stopping and asking oneself, why am I going on this now? What am I looking for? Is there a better way, a better route to feeling better than actually scrolling on Instagram or whatever and looking at these health influencers and whatnot and their sort of polished lives that they're presenting. So yeah, I think I think having that, just stopping and pausing can be really, just asking oneself the question, why am I going? But often it's very automatic, it's very unconscious, and it's kind of like reaching for a soother, but a soother that's like laced with arsenic. So yeah, I think people go on it to distract. Like you say, anxiety might be one thing, it might be just low mood, whatever, worry. But what they find then is content inevitably to ultimately make them feel more anxious. And then there's the guilt of the time spent. So there's all these layers, started off as one level of an emotion, and then there's all these other negative emotions then piling up as a result.
Yeah, I think it's important to cheat the algorithm, the feed, right? So what's happening is that I believe that they're building a profile of you and then tailoring the content to suit. They know you're going to have an emotional response to this, and this. And if you don't absorb the feed, stay away from that feed, and you are kind of cheating the algorithm in a way.
No, that's a really good point. And I think I heard that about Facebook at one time. Will keep giving you the content that you engage most with or look at. So even if I was talking to a friend about this, something that really enrages you and you're like, look what this guy is saying now, and you forward it to 10 of your friends to enrage them, so they'll keep giving you more of that. So you keep getting into this, this content that enrages you, but actually whoever it might be misogynistic content or whatever, and you identify as a feminist, but actually you're fueling whoever that content create. They don't care if you like it or you don't like it or whatever. But again, it's you're a follower, or you're downloading, you're on his page, so it doesn't matter. That I think that's the thing that we forget. It doesn't matter whether you're completely anti it. You're engaging with it, and like you say, you'll keep getting more of that, which will keep getting you enraged and making someone very successful in the process.
I'm very rich.
Yeah.
In terms of comorbidities, right? Are you noticing that there's a correlation between excessive phone use and, say, alcohol or recreational drugs or sex addiction or work? Is there anything that you're noticing that's coming up with phone addiction?
That's a really good question. The first thing that springs to mind is that there was some research done on cardiovascular health and high cell use in US college students in 2013, and they really found a strong link there between a lack of fitness and more sedentary lifestyle and high phone use. And that intuitively that seems to make sense for me. In terms of Yeah, you know what? I'd have to. I haven't seen any research on that in
Mm,
terms of my own observation, and of course, my sample size is very small. Um, yeah, I would say there is something in that. There's kind of compulsive behaviors.
mm,
Um, so yeah, I think there probably is, and that kind of that dopamine seeking, whether it's sex or drugs or alcohol, if there's that it's that lure to be drawn to dopamine triggering activities, then yeah, it's just another source. It's the same it's the same drug
mm,
ultimately. Um, but different ways to get there. So intuitively, I'd say yes, there is a link, but I
mm,
can't, I can't, I don't know any data. I don't have any data.
mm. Do you think we're going to see a 12-step program and rehab centers for
Well, there are
smartphones?
there are already. I think in London there is an internet. There's a clinic
Yeah.
that offers internet treatment,
Mm,
internet addiction. I would say so.
mm,
Yeah, I would definitely say that that will be a thing, probably in the not too distant future. I think, it is different because, with alcohol, gambling, drugs, usually it's a very clear impact on your work or
mm,
your relationship or money or your appearance,
mm.
so others can become aware of it. Whereas with the, smartphone addiction, and it has not been labeled an addiction yet. It hasn't been given that stamp, it
What
hasn't
would
been
what would your
recognized.
feeling be? Should it
Um,
be?
I think, there has to be more longitudinal research. Smartphones have only been around 12, 13 years, so it's not
Mm,
really long enough. I think gaming has only recently been, given that stamp. So it takes a while for these things to be, but certainly in terms of some of the hallmarks of addiction,
mm,
things like substitute, putting off things that are really important to you, like
mm,
exercise, like spending time with your loved ones, sacrificing things that are more your core values to
mm,
do more of the thing that you're addicted to. That's certainly there. That's certainly present, I think, in heavy smartphone users. It's like, I mean, it shows up a lot in terms of I wanted to go to the gym, want to do some exercise. A lot of my clients like I have no time to exercise, but then, very quickly it'll become clear that, they spend 3, 4, 5 hours on their phone a day. So
mm,
stuff like that, kind of blind spots, that, important things are being sacrificed to kind of serve this need, um, this compulsion. So I think, yeah, I think there are definitely some hallmarks of addiction to be seen. But as I said, I think it will probably take longer before it ticks all the boxes,
mm.
to be recognized as an addiction by the DSM-5, which is like the American Psychological Association. It's like a manual, and everything is, it's quite rigorous in terms of what it includes. So I don't think
Mm.
there's enough evidence yet.
Irish people
Yeah.
look at their phones 40% more than the European average. What's wrong with us?
Yeah, I thought I think, like, being at home and being here, it is evident to me just looking around. I mean, people are on their phone all the time here, but it does seem to have. I think what's different is there's more social acceptability from what I observe at home in terms of
Mm,
phones at restaurants, on tables with families. Whereas here, I think that's kind of getting getting more frowned upon here. But at
mm,
home, it still seems to be acceptable. And I think, the Irish are very communicative.
mm,
We're big talkers, we're big communicators, and I think that maybe it's translating into, we don't talk on the phone anymore,
mm,
but we in WhatsApp groups and whatever. So I think it's just kind of transitioning. Our chat, we're chatty.
mm.
That's what we're known as.
I suppose it's hard to figure out culturally what it is in an entire culture's psyche that
Mm.
makes us. I don't know if there's any data or research on Irish people in particular. Is there? Do you know of that we about our maybe we're more anxious? Who knows? Um, So
I think we like to talk. I
yeah.
think, that there is yeah, I think we like to talk more. We like to engage with others more. And I
Mm,
think maybe that's just happening more in the digital space,
mm,
the online space than IRL. I think maybe that could be one reason.
mm. In terms of gender differences, and say, for example, use among young people and teenagers, right? So I'm obviously a parent, and it's something that I'm concerned about, right?
Mhm.
Are we noticing like that girls will tend towards social media, whereas boys will tend towards um, video games?
Hmm.
Um, do we have any knowledge around that?
That's a really good question. I have no idea. I mean, intuitively, I'd say that would kind of make sense, but
Mm,
I don't work with the youngest I work with is 18,
mm,
so I don't really have a feel for how they're using their smartphones differently.
mm,
Um, but but it could well be the case that they're on their phones, but they're doing completely different things.
different things, yeah. What age do you think is acceptable to introduce? I know this is a tricky question because it's different
Mm,
with every parent
yeah.
and every child, but what age would you recommend to parents? Okay, we can now
Oh,
have a conversation about smartphones
oh,
with their
that's
kids.
I don't work with kids, so
Mm,
I'm not a parent, so that's kind of a minefield. I
mm,
mean, just anecdotally from friends who have kids, some of them amazingly have held out till their children are 12, 13,
mm.
which is quite something. But
That's
I
baffling.
think, yeah, but they've really remained resolute in that, and their kids play chess. It's like an old-fashioned, idyllic childhood.
Mm,
But I think what helps is that while most of their friends still do have smartphones, there is within their community. They used to live in Germany, now they live in Portugal. There are some other parents that are holding out, so they're not the only kids in the
mm, mm,
playground without phones.
mm,
And there's another friend of mine whose kids go to Waldorf school. What do you call it? Where they get to do a lot of creative work. I think it's called Waldorf schools. Where all the Silicon Valley people send their kids to, and there's
mm.
no devices, which is really interesting. So
Yeah,
the people who make all these,
the devices.
that they don't want their kids any near. Bill Gates
Mm,
didn't give his kid a smartphone till they were 14, I think.
mm,
Again, because they know exactly what they're doing and they don't want their kids. It's like,
mm,
again, like a drug dealer who's like, will have like zero tolerance and kids trying anything.
mm,
Um, so but this lady I'm speaking about, she in that school, there's very much an ethos of play, no digital devices. So she finds it easy because the kids' friends, none of them have devices, and they're about 12 and 10, something like that. So I
mm.
think I think it's probably easier if your social group, other parents are kind of holding out as well. But when everyone else in the class has a phone and they're the only ones that doesn't, I think that must be really difficult for parents to manage. Um,
Ostracization,
yeah,
stigmatization,
yeah,
bullying, which seems to have moved online as well, is something that we're noticing through the smartphones, right?
yeah.
Um, people are yeah, there's bullying. Like yeah, we're hearing reports of new self-image adjusting apps that are
Hmm.
appearing, digital filters. I don't know. What do you think the effect of these digital filters are in society? Right? What
Yeah. I think I think it's really harmful actually. I think we've become sort of losing touch with what a normal face looks like. And
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of, in the beauty industry, aside from what these filters have led to is that
Mm,
people go to estheticians and go, I want an Instagram filtered face,
mm,
so whether it's the lips or the bigger eye, procedures that will mimic the filters that you can use on Instagram, so that when you're walking around a place IRL, you can look like Instagram.
Mm.
So I think like for anyone over 30, it's probably fine. We've kind of grown up with the kind of mainly in the formative years without these things. But I
Mm.
think for the younger generation and that are kind of just getting to know themselves and their place in the world, I think it can be really, really toxic. I think I think it must be really challenging for parents to navigate, to kind of reassure their kids that they're fine, they're normal
Mm.
when, there's this benchmark, unrealistic, actually, unattainable image of beauty that's,
That's
that's
unattainable.
conveyed through digital channels.
If somebody wanted to become more resilient against excessive phone use, they wanted to start a digital detox,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
What would you recommend there?
So the first step, I mean, I would recommend is, detox is like, it sounds like scarcity. It sounds like who wants to do a detox? You're
Mm.
going to be hungry. You're going to be miserable. You're probably going to be bored. It's got such negative connotations for me, at least anyway. They're my associations.
Mm.
So I think kind of how do you build resilience in anything is like over time, you train that muscle. How do
Mm.
you, there's a technique in my book called, what's it called? Weight training. Weight training, WAIT
WAIT.
training. Yeah. So it's like starting small. It's not, I think, there's a lot of hoo-ha about, just this kind of, I think our society really likes
Mm.
fast results and transformation, rapid transformation. But actually, it takes between 24 days and 36 days to break a habit. So, that's an estimate. So like we need to be patient with ourselves. So the first thing I think is like starting small.
Mm.
How do you build that weight? How do you build your tolerance to being without your phone? When I started researching the book, that's exactly what I intended to do. How do I build up my tolerance for being without my phone? And the
Mm.
first thing I did was, okay, when I go out to walk my dog, 45 minutes to an hour, that's fine, right? It's not that long. So I started there, I left my phone at home, and just I think there was positive reinforcement there because I enjoyed my walk more. I had more interactions with people. I was looking up rather than checking my phone occasionally, and I was more engaged with him. And then I was like, actually, you know what? I want to do more of this. Not because it's good for me or not because, none of the kind of virtue reasons, just it's actually relaxing. I feel
Mm.
like I'm having a break. And then I would take, let's say I was going to the cinema locally with a friend and I knew where we were meeting and I'd let them know, like, listen, I don't have my phone. So if you're running late or anything, you can't let me know, but we'll meet there at 5. So I might go out for 3 or 4 hours without my phone and just build it up got to a point where now Sundays I switch my data off. And during
Mm.
Lent, Saturdays and Sundays I switch my data off. But I couldn't have gone from using my phone 4 or 5 hours a day to taking a weekend off. It would have been too hard.
Mm.
And I would have failed. And then I would have thought, oh, what's the point? When
Mm.
we set these really big, lofty, great sounding goals and we fail, we think, oh, it's useless.
Mm.
But I think by setting smaller goals and building them up, it builds that resilience that you spoke of, and it builds the feeling that I can do this. It's not too bad. It's actually good. This is the thing. You think, oh, I'm going to miss that, this, that, and
Mm.
the other. It's actually amazing how much more headspace you have, how much more relaxed you feel without, I mean, I'm going to say without things pinging. My phone doesn't ping. I have it on silent, but even still being aware of what might be on it, it just creates space for a break and
Mm.
our mind to just wander a bit and be creative and switch off as well, which is really, really important to mentally not be doing that sort of computing about what am I going to write back to that person? Oh, that person left me a voice note. Where there's a lot of calculating going on. There's a lot of
Mm.
multitasking and switching between one thing and the other. So I think it's really powerful when we allow ourselves that opportunity, that time off, and just to kind of notice how it feels. Because I think the more we do it, actually, ironically, the more we want to do it. It feels rather than feeling like deprivatory, it feels like I'm having a break,
Mm,
And another thing I do is, on Sundays, I switch off data, but I can still make phone calls and people can call me.
mm,
So, a lot of people say, oh, what if there's an emergency? Well, I think it's really important to let everyone important in your life know I won't be on WhatsApp, but if there is an emergency, just make an old-fashioned call and I'll pick up if I can. So I think, you know, that kind of again created opportunity for actually having a decent phone chat with someone. So I couldn't just send a lazy little WhatsApp,
mm.
hey, how are you? Blah, blah. It was more like, okay, I'm setting aside an hour to catch up with a friend properly. And that was really, really helpful for my friendships as well. So, just going a bit deeper, not having like 20 chats during the day with multiple people in groups and whatever, and kind of skimming the surface, but
Mm.
actually speaking to one or two friends and really having a proper catch up.
Plus, there seems to be this thing in society where everybody's terrified of being bored, and we've lost an understanding of the importance of being idle. And when you're idle and when you're bored, that's when the imagination fires, and that's
Absolutely.
when things come into the space and fill the space. Ideas. So
Mm-hmm.
how can you have an idea if you're constantly checking your phone?
Right. Yeah, because we're consuming so much, there's no
Yeah.
space to kind of create. We're taking everything
Mm.
in, So
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. We need that space, call it boredom, doing nothing to kind of come up with those sort of loose associations you get when you're daydreaming, gazing out a window. It's really important to have that downtime.
Mm.
Yeah.
So everything from banking to school WhatsApp groups relies on phone usage. How viable do you think it is to completely ditch the smartphone?
Mm-hmm.
Can we go back to a 90s style flip phone? Is it too late? Is it too late to stem the tide? Have we crossed the Rubicon? Right. What are your
Well,
thoughts?
I know some people. I know a guy who has a BlackBerry, and he
Yeah.
manages to do his banking, and he manages to keep in touch with his friends and have a social life and
Mm,
do most normal things without a smartphone. So it definitely can be done. I know other people. I was quoted in this BBC article last year. It was on the back of a kind of some case studies on people who had totally ditched their smartphones. But I have noticed, and I met a lady on Saturday night at a party who again didn't have a smartphone, but her husband was very quick to point out. He was like, "Yeah, but I'm usually with her to order the Uber."
mm, mm,
So there's a little bit of surrogate
mm,
use going on. So I think, and some of the people in the BBC case study, again, one lady had a husband with a smartphone, so was able to do FaceTime and whatever through that. So,
mm,
there are different ways of giving up a smartphone. You might not own one, but
mm,
you could be using one. So there are those kind of proxy approaches. But I think, yeah, people do. Like as I said, I know one guy who does and seems to live a content. He could have a smartphone, he can afford a smartphone, but it's just a choice that he's made. I think it's just, things just take, he has the internet, he's got a laptop at home. So things just take, maybe it's not there when we're out and about, but when we go home, we can make that transfer, do that thing or whatever. So,
mm.
we manage without them up until, really, I think 15 years ago, 2007, the first iPhone, but it's, really only ubiquitous in the past 8 or 9,
Mm,
maybe 10 max,
mm.
So it's not, when you consider like the billions of years we've been around, we've managed to do without for a long time. So, and as I said, some people still do.
Mm.
Um, so it is possible. Yeah.
Plus, I mean, you spoke, you use a smartphone yourself, but obviously you're able to manage it and you're very mindful and conscious of how you use it. And that seems to be the overriding message at this stage. It could get worse.
Mm-hmm.
Those engineering companies, those tech companies are working round the clock.
Mm-hmm.
I can assure you, very
Yeah.
hard, right?
Yeah,
To make
yeah.
sure that you're looking at that thing around the clock, right? But the direction of travel, well, we'll see where we are in 5 years. So one question I was going to ask is, what does a healthy relationship with your phone look like? But I think we know that. I think we've discussed that. So any final thoughts on phone addiction any questions that I haven't asked you that you think I should have asked you?
I think you've pretty much covered it. It's quite exhaustive. But yeah, I mean, I think like with, trying to regulate any behavior, unwanted behavior in our lives, I think it's really important to remind ourselves that, the force of the brain power and investment that's kind of stacked up against us. And to kind of be mindful of our use, but also to go, it's not because we're a sucker. It's not because we have a low willpower.
Guilt.
No, it's there is such an enormous effort into getting us to spend more time on it. So it requires, if we want to change our relationship, it does require patience and not to be too harsh on ourselves, because, it's quite something, the amount of investment that's being made to make us do more and more and more and more, and spend more time and to be more engaged with our device and to live in a way online, and to kind of be drawn more and more into that world. So I think, I would say, be compassionate towards yourself, and just be mindful, just observe, even if it's not, okay, I feel like shit, that's why I'm going on my phone. Okay, well, even if you go on your phone, you've established a link, you've learned something. And maybe the next time, it'll be, yeah, I feel like shit. Is there anything else I could do, that might be more beneficial to me, might be more helpful to me? So it's just kind of observing your patterns and behaviors, and trying to create some new behaviors that are more beneficial for your mental health.
And that are not reinforcing the smartphone addictive behavior. So going back on and on and on again.
Yeah.
Okay, so the book is the Phone Addiction Workbook. People can grab a copy in all good bookstores.
Nationwide.
And Amazon, right?
Sorry?
And Amazon. They can get it on Amazon as well.
Yeah.
Where can people find you online?
hildaburke.co.uk. And I'm on Instagram, Hilda_Burke _psychotherapist, and Twitter, HB Therapist.
HB Therapist.
You notice my content isn't updated that often.
I did, because I think I followed you this morning.
Sorry?
I think I followed you this morning, and I noticed that as well. I think I added you as on my Twitter.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Hilda. I think this has been really, really important and really useful, and some fantastic ideas, and the work that you're doing is really helpful, because the storm is coming and it's going to get greater.
Yeah. Oh.
So
portentous.
pay portentous. I don't want to be a portent of doom, but that was great. Thank you so much.
Pleasure speaking to you, Conor.
It was lovely talking to you.